All right, let's look at this kit of parts that we're going to use to make the battery holder. Our battery box. We've got a couple power wires. We've got a 90-degree jack. And then we've got this cable and this jack are going to be used for the power charging cable along with this heat shrink. And then this is the balance plug. And then this box has a cover that comes off when you slide it. And then on the inside we have the positive contact, and then a bridge contact for the bottom, and then a negative contact on this side. And the first thing we want to do to work on this is take off this little plastic piece. So this is held in place with a post right here and right here. So to take this off, you've got to be really careful and stick your flat-bladed screwdriver right down here and kind of wiggle this loose like that. As soon as that comes loose, you got to come to the other side and wiggle this side loose, or else you'll break that piece of plastic. And then when the two sides come off, now you can take this out of here. Set that aside. And now you can see what's inside under that cover. The black wire goes to the negative side, the red wire goes to the switch, and when the switch is in this position, it connects the positive terminal to the red wire. When it's like that, it's turned off. The way this is going to end up wired is that our red wire is going to go to the positive terminal, the black wire is going to go to the negative terminal, and the yellow wire is going to run down here to the base connector. So we're going to drill a hole in this wall with a 1/16 inch drill bit, and then we're going to run that yellow wire down in this corner down to this side, and we're going to solder it onto this contact. So the first thing that we need to do in that process is drill the hole in that wall. So I've got a drill here with the right size drill bit. I'm just going to take this and go right in this corner and drill. You don't have to, it doesn't have to be down way down low. It can be halfway up this wall, and then just drill this at an angle. And we're popping through this wall to let that wire come out the back side. There we go. So now it's poked through. And in the toolkit, we have a pair of tweezers, like that. So we're going to take this wire, you're going to take your tweezers, and you're going to feed this wire into the end of that hole that we drilled. There we go. Feed it on through, a little bit at a time, and now it's sticking out this side, and you can grab it with your tweezers and pull it through. And now we can strip this end by rolling it along the blade like that. We pull it off. Now we've got a little bit of wire exposed. We twist it so that it doesn't come undone. And now we're going to solder it to this piece of contact down here. And to do that, we're going to take this contact out of here so that we can solder it. We don't melt everything. So you just kind of give it a little push and it'll pop right out. And we're going to solder that wire right in this area, right in here. So to do that, I'm going to use my little helping hands tool. It has a bunch of alligator clips. I'm going to use this to hold on to it like that. Now when you're soldering something like this, the trick is that you want to put a melted blob of solder right where you're going to put the wire, and then you're going to put a melted blob of solder on the end of your wire, and that's called tinning the two connections. And then you can take the two and you can hold them together and touch that with your soldering iron, and that will melt those two blobs of solder together. So first thing we're going to do is put our little pad of solder on this, like that. There we go. Okay, and now we're going to melt a little bit of solder onto the end of this wire to tin it. There we go, like that. Lay that on there and melt that pool. Yeah, there, liquefied. Lay the solder on. There we go. That's a nice joint. Ah, nope, it's not. Okay, we're gonna melt this pool again. Lay the solder wire on. Now they're both hot, and lift off the soldering iron and let it cool. There, now we've got a good secure connection. And now the next step is we're going to put this back in here and we're going to glue this wire down into this corner using hot glue. So I'm going to plug in my hot glue gun. There we go. Now while that is warming up, let's feel this. This is cool now. We can take this bridge plate and reinstall it in our box by sliding it into this slot. Like that. There we go. You can take your screwdriver and just lay this yellow wire right down in this corner where it's going to run. So it'll run right like here. It'll run right along the bottom of this, right up to the top side, and it'll come up and then go down through that hole. And now let's remove the old red wire and the old black wire. Take this soldering iron and touch it right on here. Melt that solder and that red wire should come right off. We're going to do the same thing over here and take this black wire off. Like that. That goes out of the way. When these get soldered in place, the red wire is going to come through here and it's going to come over right over to this area and it's going to get soldered onto that contact. So we can cut this, we can trim this red wire right to that length and we can strip it. The black wire is going to come right up here and it's going to get soldered right onto that little tab. So it only needs to be about that long. We'll trim that off like that and then we'll strip the black wire. There. And we'll go ahead and tin the ends of those two wires so that they've got a solder blob on them. We'll solder on the soldering iron first. Over to our red wire. There we go. Get a little solder on the black wire. There we go. So in our toolkit we also have a pair of bent needle nose pliers. So I'm going to use those pliers to grab this and work it on out of that slot. There. So now it's out where we can work with it and we can solder onto that tab. In addition to the little wires that are going to go to the negative and the positive, we're also going to attach these heavier wires that are taking the power from the battery out to the connector. So we need to strip off the ends of these wires too, like that. It looks like did I get it? Yeah, there we go. There we go. And now we want to tin the ends of these wires also. You can see that solder flows really nice into that wire. Working with silicone wire or silicone insulated wire is nice because the silicone doesn't melt. Plastic coated wire melts. The insulation burns, it melts and burns when you work with it. So there we go. We've got solder on that end. And you'll notice that I put solder on the end of the soldering iron first and let that liquid solder act as a heat transfer liquid into the end of the wire, and then I try to feed the solder onto the end of the wire and let the wire melt the solder into place if I can. That gives you a better bond. There. While we did that soldering, the hot glue gun has come up to temperature, so now we can use the hot glue gun to bond our yellow wire into place. And the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to use my screwdriver to hold it into that corner and put glue from the middle out towards the end and just kind of bury it in glue. There we go. And then once that's held in place with the glue in that corner, I can do the same thing headed towards the other corner. There. So now that should be locked in place. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to connect our tinned wires to our switch and to our contact. And to do that, just to make it a little easier, I'm going to pull this contact out of here with my pliers. And I'm going to hold on to it with my alligator clip, like that. Now with this negative contact, we're going to attach the black wire. So I'm going to use my two alligator clips to hold these wires together. So I'm going to position that right like that. It's giving it a little bit of pressure. I'm feeding solder against that contact to make sure that the contact itself is hot enough to melt solder, so that we know for sure that it makes a good joint. And it's taken a long time because it takes a lot of heat to melt all this stuff and warm it all up. There it goes. There we go. Now it's starting to melt there. And while that's still hot like that, I'm going to take my black wire, my little black wire, and melt it in there too. There. So now those are all fused together. Whew, boy, that wire's hot. Good. Looks like a pretty good joint. To solder the red wire onto our switch, I'm going to hold on to the switch with this alligator clip like this, and then the red wire is going to come in from the side. So I'm going to grab it with the end and then manipulate this around so that it holds the two together. There, so now that contact is hot enough that it's melting solder right down onto the wire. So we add that to that joint so that'll make a good contact. And now we can take our red wire and add it on top to that joint. It should be hot enough to melt right into place. There it goes. So when we let go, it should all solidify and make a good joint. Take a look at it. It looks pretty good. So now we can reinstall this contact back into the housing. Like that. And then the switch slides down into place like that. There. The big thick black wire drops into that slot first, and the red wire has to go on top of it, and then these three small wires have to lay in there too. So we're going to have to use our X-Acto knife and carve this slot deep enough so that both of these wires lay down in that slot. I'm going to repop this black contact back out of here to get it out of the way. Like that. There we go. And now we'll use the X-Acto knife carefully to carve this deeper. Like that. Now this is very sharp, so you don't have to put a whole lot of pressure on it. You don't have to carve away a ton of plastic with each cut. Just let the knife do the work with small, thin, controllable cuts. Not too bad. There we go. So now we'll test fit these wires in place. Drop the red one down in first, and then see how the black one fits on top. And you want these wires to be down below this flat surface that's right here, because when this cover drops in place, this little piece has to push down into that little slot. So you want to give it lots of room. Let's take it just a little bit deeper. Okay. There we go. Okay, so let's reinstall our negative contact. Drop that down in the slot. Use my screwdriver to push it into place. We'll run the black wire down to the bottom, because this contact is easy to bend down, and then the red wire will go on top of it like that, and then our small wires will run on top of that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep these together up to the point where it goes inside, and then there's a little bit of an extra slack in the red wire and the black wire. So I'm going to use my screwdriver to sort of push that slack down inside this pocket, so that these three wires, the part of these three wires that come out, are all the same length. Tuck that down inside like that. And now we should be able to reinstall our cover. So the cover sits right like this. Press it into place. There. So now the cover sits down here flush like it needs to for this cover to go in and slide into place. Our main connector wires are a little bit long. We left it long so that there would be enough to cut these off to the lengths that we need to attach it to this connector. And this connector has a little O-ring on it that holds it closed, and then it folds open like this, and these wires are soldered onto this connector. This connector has two contacts in it. This one is attached to the barrel. That one goes to the black wire. And the white wire is going to attach to this little tab that sticks up, and that goes to the tip. We want to make these wires so that the center of the connector is 3 inches from the end of the battery pack. If we lay our connector right here at 3 inches, like that, the tip of the red wire that's going to be soldered to this tab needs to come up to about right there. So we're going to take our snippers and snip that off flush. And we're going to solder the tip of this onto here first, and then we'll attach the black wire. So our first step in that process is to expose the tip of this wire. We're just going to strip off just a very little bit because we only have to solder the very end of this wire onto this tab, just like that. And what we're going to do is, while that's still hot, we're going to take this barrel connector and touch it right like that to make it stick. So to do that, we're going to get some solder on the tip of this first. And it doesn't really take a whole lot of heat because there's not a lot of thermal mass in that tab. So now let's heat up our wire. Nice bit of solder on there. Take our connector, set it right on the end. There we go, nice and melted together. There we go. Hey, bud. Okay, so let's take a good look at that solder joint. Seems to be pretty firm. It's not going anywhere. We can solder this black wire onto this tab. We're going to lay this in place like it would go, and we're going to cut that off right in this area, like that. There. May still be just a little bit long. Let's go ahead and make that a little shorter. Cut off some of these conductors. So that can lay like that. And with this wire, we have these little tabs that stick up that we can bend into place to kind of grab the insulation and hold it in place. Use our pliers to squeeze these in place. And again, it's going to take a little while for the heat to penetrate that heavy wire. There we go. We could probably flip this over and add more solder to this side. Get a little bit more on the tip. And lay that on our wires. There we go. So now it's starting to get hot enough to melt on the tab of the connector. All right. Again, this wire now is really hot, so you have to let it cool down. I'm going to take my pliers and clamp these little tabs onto our wire, like that. Clamp the other side too, like that. And now we're going to take our O-ring. Make sure this is not hot anymore. I take our O-ring and slide it over the whole thing. If I was smart, I would have put this O-ring on here first. So that goes in place. And now this is the insulative jacket that goes onto the jack. What it looks like to me is that this is a real snug fit with these two big wires that are in here. Hopefully they will squeeze into place. There we go. Squeeze into place and put our O-ring over the end of that. With that O-ring in place, it holds the connector housing on top. Still wants to, there's a little bit of a crack here because the wires are pretty big, but it's not coming off, it's not going anywhere. And let's check and see. Yeah, so we have 3 inches between our battery case and the middle of the plug. When you install your batteries into this case, this is what the batteries look like. There's a little ring around the little button end that is the positive side. And the label even has a minus sign by the negative side. And the negative side always goes on the spring. So you would install these batteries like this. Now this one, when it goes in, it's pushing on that hot glue just a little bit. So we can come in here with our X-Acto knife and carve away a little bit of this hot glue that's right here getting in the way. Like that. I'll use our needle nose to just pull that little bit of glue out of there. It also looks like there's a little bit of glue right up in this area that the top of the battery could touch. So I'm going to trim that out of there too. There we go. Now that our hot glue is cleared out of the way, we can take our batteries and install them. The negative goes against the spring, and on this side the negative goes against the spring, like that. And we can check to make sure that we wired this correctly by using this battery checker. You got to make sure that the switch is moved to on, And when you plug it in with the negative side, the black wire, towards this side, the side with the chip on it, or the side with the decimal points is the black side. So you plug that in, and it tells you that you have 2 cells, and all of them are 7.4 volts. The first one is 3.7 and the second one is 3.7. And that's how you can check a battery. And now we know that that's good. We can switch that off. We could put our cover in place. So now we've got a battery pack that will power our goggles. And that's how we build a battery pack.